All right, so on this panel, we will talk about remote monitoring, right? Shaping tomorrow delivery of care. It's an important topic because we all know how we have managed to accelerate digital health in many shape or form, but I think remote monitoring is truly one that we should talk about, right? And so the way that we will go about this panel is really, I think one after the other, I'll just ask question and we'll just go with the flow. I can tell our attendees that they can ask questions in the Q&A section. We will try and answer as we go, and we will try to reserve some of these questions at the end if we can, if we have the time. If we don't, please, sorry, bear with us. But in the meantime, we will be really happy to try our best to answer. And so listen, guys, of course, the first question is really about knowing you a bit more. So I will start with you, Hayley, and wanting to understand, can you maybe just give us an introduction of yourself about Peak Medical? We would like to understand a bit more what you do and what is the pain point that you are solving?
Thanks, Helen. Amazing to be here and part of the cohort for 2021, of course, as well. So a little bit about, the founder always, it's the vision and the drive often comes from the founders, So my background is really driven by my dad's farming accident and really making sure we can help people get better access with healthcare at home. So being on the remote monitoring panel today is just where our sweet spot is. I started the company Peak Medical to look at changing how people experience healthcare and really challenging the traditional models that we experience in health. And essentially what we want to do is change both the cost barrier to accessing optimal healthcare and, of course, getting better data insights and just changing the fact that people can't often get into those clinics or those physio appointments or that surgeon appointment. So bringing all of that optimal healthcare system at home. And that's our mission with Peak.
Very good. Thank you so much, Hayley. Shaun, over to you. Kind of same question. Please give us an introduction about yourself, your solution, and the pain point that you are solving.
Sure. Hi, everyone. Really great to be here and just echoing Hayley's sentiments. So I'm one of the founding members of RunKicker. We originally started out as an AI-driven, health steps-based kind of tracker tool. And then as we went through the evolution, we realized actually that's not where we needed to be. Before we send anyone on a 5 or 10K run or ask them to do anything, we actually need to understand their risk. And then through a personal experience, in this case, an NCD with a CVD risk that had a collapsed artery, which you can see the results of down here, that really cemented the path that we were going to be on, is how can we, at least from our very founding vision, allow or attribute the risk that someone has and allow them to spend at least a year or two extra with their kids watching football. And myself and our co-founder, we kind of got on this journey watching our kids play soccer. And, the last 3-4 years have been, an exciting time, not without its limitations, but, we're now at the point that we're into our first customer and first clinical trial. So a very exciting time for us and great to be here, as I said.
Fantastic. We will talk about this a bit later for sure. Lincoln, what about you? Same question. Maybe give us a small intro and tell us what you are really what you are really solving and the pain points that you are all about.
Thank you for having me today, Helen. Just so everybody knows, I'm Lincoln Dacy, and I'm the CEO and co-founder of Accelerate Technologies. We've been developing our product Reby for about 4 years. And what Reby is a telehealth ecosystem that connects the patients, the practitioner, and the caregiver via wearable sensors and applications. Basically, we enable patients to be monitored remotely for musculoskeletal conditions. The two problems that we really solve is first for the patient, and then there's for the hospital. For the patient, we create access to physiotherapists in a cost-effective way that enables them to access physiotherapy from the comfort of their own home. For the hospitals, we reduce the number of face-to-face visits by patients, which in turn leads to shorter waiting times in the hospital, allowing the therapist to concentrate on more higher value customers.
Very good. Thank you so much, Lincoln. Very, very clear. Okay, so listen, let's kind of dive in. So let's start with Hayley. I'm curious to know, right? Because when we are looking at remote monitoring, this is all about collecting data, right? For the patient, but as well as for the health professionals. So how does Peak Medical do this, right? About all the collection of data, and then how does that data actually delivers better care?
Yeah. So there's a lot of data monitoring devices at home. Not everyone has access to them, and there's a level of data that's being collected. And so for us, it's about then making that really, really meaningful, and it's understanding what is really at heart of the patient. So for us, the data is there to obviously motivate and really tap into, I guess part of our process is to really understand the patient at the start as one of our stakeholders. We obviously, like Lincoln as well, we have the physio, we have the surgeon, we have multiple stakeholders. But just talking about the patient at home, what's important to them is obviously recovering, obviously having absolutely the same feedback that you would get and experience that you would get going to that clinic and seeing that physiotherapist. So not only flexion extension data or how you're straightening your knee, we want to start to overlay and get insights into maybe they've done a 5-kilometer walk that morning, or they haven't moved for 2 days. So what are our intrinsic, I guess, what's the data telling us to, move them more or move them less? And then further to that, translating that data into really meaningful points of what's working out there in the population, what's not working, what trends can we start to look at to actually change our protocols and tweak them. So we're sending people home with this more optimal protocol to start with. And so that's data we can then drive back to the surgeon and start to integrate and work with that stakeholder to deliver better outcomes as well.
Which was not possible just a few years ago, right? So it has to change the landscape.
Oh yeah, and I bet all the panelists as well. We're quite aligned with everything we're doing, and it's such an exciting space. Pre-pandemic, there wasn't such a highlight on what we're doing, and now it's here. We need these solutions at home to simply reduce the COVID transmission. So the post-pandemic world is really where companies like all of us on the panel today are going to thrive.
Yeah, this is truly I guess one way to view how COVID have accelerated some of the innovation in healthcare. So that's the good news.
That's the only good news. Yeah.
Indeed. Excellent. Shaun, I mean, when we look at your solution, of course, they may not fit exactly the bill of the typical remote monitoring space, right? But nevertheless, you have created an AI-driven solution, right? And it really gives the ability to understand the health risk of the individual. And this is really monitored on a regular basis, right? And it really helps create or at least prevent certain action, right? But at the same time, I'm sure that there is different things that you have experienced when it comes to acceptance, right? And actually, how do you retain some of these users to be able to accept to be monitored and share their data? I mean, what are some of these things that you have seen that are really the successful outcome of your solution?
Good question. I mean, the thing with COVID that we have found in terms of being able to manage and monitor NCDs is that COVID has literally turned infrastructure on its head, and it's really shaken the consumer's sense of well-being. And so the behavioral change we've seen is more of an acceptance of the ability to risk or manage yourself and monitor yourself at the edge. And so the way in which we do that is obviously taking a series of AI and machine learning algorithms to determine that risk level, and then using that at the edge on a smartphone in the most frictionless way possible. So there are a number of things that we have to engage with the users, understanding obviously the way they utilize the capability. Is it frictionless, or does it take 5 minutes and they give up after 2? So the number of things that we've found really make a difference. There's also, of course, the aging population scenario, the technology less than savvy capability. So we've allowed family members to be able to do that risk for them at a kind of population level. So we're seeing that there's less of a reluctance. I mean, if anyone wants to challenge, I don't really want my data being given out, then all you have to remember is the last time you went to a clinic here in Singapore. You don't just have to do trace together. You actually have to fill out a documentation or health documentation. There's a number of questions there. But what if you could actually just extend that health declaration and within 90 seconds determine before you walk into the doctor what your risk of NCDs is, give him the information, and so you're exercising better value for your time by looking at what you're most acceptable to in that time frame. And so that's one of the clinical aspects that we're looking at, not in Singapore, but in Indonesia, of how you're not going in just to fix a cut on your finger, your foot, but actually I'm over 45, I'm at risk of NCDs, so I'm going to make this a seamless, frictionless interaction with a much better informed patient to a doctor who has that information that they need to ascertain at that time. So whether it be in clinic or out in the field, there is a coming together and understanding that patients and infrastructure are working in new paradigms going forward as a result of COVID.
Yes, I guess it's truly saying that the patient is getting more and more involved, right? When it comes to any of these particular screening decisions or sharing, the data that they have with their providers as well, right?
A much more activated patient who's willing to work with the doctors to make an informed and considered decision. Not in all cases, that won't be the matter in all cases, but certainly if they have that information to hand, they can at least ask those informed decisions.
Yeah, I think that it's putting a few elements together now to really help us see how digital health can be, truly embedded now as our new healthcare, right? Very interesting. Thank you so much, Shaun. Lincoln, let's talk about something very, very interesting here, because we're talking about the patient, the health professional really getting involved with all these data and participating. But you've been working, for the past few years now with a lot of hospital, right? And I'd be interested to know if you have seen like a certain shift in the mindset of hospital as well, and the acceptance of, remote rehabilitation solution that you guys are providing.
Very good question, Helen. I hope this doesn't go a bit long-winded, this answer, but we're seeing actually a complete shift of mindset from both the patients and the practitioners. We've seen this mind shift as senior citizens are especially becoming more in touch and wanting to take control of their health outcomes. Every day we're getting senior citizens that are approaching us from using Rebi and saying how helpful it is for them to self-monitor their progress trends. This enables them to seek early intervention if they feel that they're deteriorating or they're not getting the health outcomes that they're providing. And I think this is due to that patients have gotten used to, over the last few years, using things such as health trackers for health and wellness and become accustomed to using telehealth solutions. And what we're now seeing is the next evolution where patients are seeking more data to monitor their health recovery and monitor their own progress trends. And they're really asking for data-driven insights to where they're to manage their recovery and have control over their healthcare. Patients are now looking for specific biomarkers to monitor their progress and make informed decisions about their healthcare. But we're also seeing this now come from the hospital systems, where we're seeing a complete shift in the approach that public hospitals are taking towards digital healthcare in Singapore. I believe we're just about to see a change in the paradigm of how remote rehabilitation is integrated into Singapore and also into other countries like Australia. And remote rehabilitation will become the new norm. 18 months ago, we actually had no chance to work with real live patients and transfer data between the patient, the practitioner, and the caregiving circle. But recently, Accelerate, we've been lucky enough to pass all the new regulatory approvals and frameworks and work directly with hospital patients and transfer data in real time. And this is what I see a real big change. And I believe in the next few years, we'll be able to deliver safer, cheaper alternative methods of healthcare that ultimately lead to better patient outcomes with hospitals in Singapore and around the world.
That is very interesting, because I think that you're also bringing the perspective about how do we have a certain regulatory framework, right, around these sharings of data. So not only is the patient now asking for those solutions, but at the same time, I think that hospitals feel a bit stuck, right, and not being able to, there's a thin line with the data protection and what they can do. So you bring some very, very interesting point here. Thank you so much, Lincoln. Hayley, let's go back to you a bit. So we were just actually talking about that, right? How can we improve not only the outcome of the recovery, but as well as increase, I guess, and better provide better experience for the patient at home? This is like truly another environment as well, right?
Yeah, absolutely. I think key to that is really, it goes back to, again, linking with you, the patient, and really understanding what's important to them. And one of the things we're seeing out there in the orthopedic world, particularly, and as a clinician, that's, where we're focused. We're really seeing people, I guess, really go to that. If we look at total knee operations and things, we're seeing it go to day surgery. So traditionally, you as a patient, you go in, you're into surgery and out of that onto the ward, and you're there for 4 or 5 days. That's actually going to your day surgery components. So they are going in for a major operation and going home. So in terms of what we want to be doing, it's looking at the behavioral aspects in a very strong way. Other industries do this incredibly well. So Noom, for example, with the weight loss industry, they tap into the patient to understand their fear, their anxiety. And so these are behavioral aspects that we see that are really important to patients. And we know as clinicians, they actually change the pain response. So if we start to make those links and very simply change the questions we're asking the patients and addressing the behavioral science component, if you like, in a heavy way, we can actually change the pain response. So that's one outcome we can start to have a look at. And, the data and the way we're delivering our system can gain that kind of data. So I hope that answers the question. It's so deep, and we could go off in a million ways with it, but I truly believe, I think one of the missing pieces out there is the behavioral science piece, and doing that incredibly well. And that's what we hope to deliver.
Yeah, exactly. But I think you also bring a good point. The thing is that this is still very new, right? And so to the extent that we can really corroborate both sides, right? The at-home treatment, there's still so much to learn as well, I imagine, right? You're probably facing that every day, things that you
what's exactly what's important, what's not, what's the traditional model, meeting the patients where they're at. Shaun mentioned it before. There's a certain patient population that we can affect immediately, but there's other patient populations that are going to take a little while to warm up to this kind of technology. And Lincoln mentioned it as well. There is a shift in paradigm. We're certainly seeing with our conversations with the market access for our products in India, the conversations with CEOs of hospitals is, we've got an orthopedic department we'd like to set up, and let's get you in at the very start. So they're very receptive of this kind of remote monitoring and these systems in place versus trying to work us into more traditional models. So there is a paradigm, as Lincoln mentioned too.
Exactly. And that's refreshing to hear.
Right.
Very, very refreshing to hear. That's pretty good. We can see that things are really slowly changing, because you've been in the industry for a few years, and that's really great outcomes that we are seeing right now. That's fantastic, Hayley, to hear. Thank you so much. Shaun, I guess that, we all know when it comes to personalized and continuous health risk assessment, right? It is currently limited, but with your technology, on top of it is on your mobile phone, right? Health providers and insurers can actually have this new model of care that they can work with the patient. Do you believe that actually the current climate that we're in is actually accelerating as well, this adoption of this new form of care model, a bit like Hayley is experiencing as well?
Well, let me focus in on answering that question by, talking about our behavioral science view.
Mm-hmm.
So
yes.
before COVID hit, we actually went to Stanford, met the head of health prevention, Dr. Abby King, because one thing we found is as difficult as our technology is to bring to market, I'm talking about AI getting blood pressure and blood oxygenation from your finger, BMI from your face, we actually put behavioral science in the same category. So we went and we understood, and we sat with them for a day and understood some of the studies that they've done in terms of putting people into different buckets and social, analytical, effective lifestyle. Came back and spent a year, literally a year with SMU Psychology Division to create a profile matrix, because we see retention as critical as the technology itself. Because in most health and fitness applications, after 30 days, they drop off a cliff. Literally, there's a 97 to 95% reduction in usage for most of those. So that's the silver bullet that I see. We can have the best technology out there, but if we don't crack that code to have people use it at the edge or in the clinic, you've wasted your time. So fundamentally, everything we do is built on our behavioral science psychology matrix. And for example, if you have a medication reminder, there's a different way to approach that reminder with an analytical person as it is with a social person. The same as if you're at risk of certain NCDs. If it's at diabetes, you don't suddenly say, you have 90 days before the clock starts ticking. If they're a social person, you put them into a social environment. So that's part of the ecosystem that we're building on the back of this trial, is to determine if those outcomes are as we have planned and as we've researched. So within the next 3 to 6 months, we'll have an understanding. And it's a microservice. So we've actually built that as its own microservice, so that if insurance providers and healthcare providers want to be able to communicate, then we can understand what type of patients they have, categorize that patient into the right type of behavioral profile, and interact with them accordingly, as well as that technology. So there's a better utilization and a better personalization, of that experience.
Yeah, and I mean, I'm curious to hear. I imagine that in the past year, you've also have experienced different conversation now with insurers that you didn't have before, right? It's probably really, they probably are curious to see now how can you implement things like that, and how things have changed, right?
Insurers, yes, but insurers, the conversation can sometimes be short when they mention the word actuaries. So really for us, our value to insurers is to add capability to the current environment, not to kind of white label end to end, but certainly for insurers, understanding how to communicate is very important to them. Having a more meaningful exchange with their customers, absolutely critical to them. And so, that applies as a microservice or as a white label service, either way. But it's becoming as critical, as I said, as the technology itself.
Very interesting. Thank you so much, Shaun. Before I dive in to the next question with LinkedIn, I would just like to say to our participant, you can ask Q&As using the Q&A function. Please do not hesitate. We may have a few minutes to be able to go through them, so please go ahead. We will be able to really grab a few minutes and make sure that we answer your question. I think Nadine was asking if you can provide the website and the contact info from the speakers. Yes, if you guys want to share your details in the attendees question, please go ahead. Thank you so much, Nadine, for your question. Okay, listen, LinkedIn, we were talking earlier about, all of this change, of course, more on the hospital side of things. But what is your kind of larger vision when it comes to the future of remote rehabilitation, and where do you think this is heading?
Oh, Helen, this is actually a topic that really excites me, because I think I'm so fortunate to be in a position where we get to design and shape the future of healthcare. It's actually something I often meet with Hayley, and we have a coffee in the morning, and we discuss our crazy ideas of how we see the future folding out for both our companies. But I see that remote rehabilitation is only just at the very beginning. Like, we haven't even really begun to see the possibilities of this. Like most companies in this space for remote rehabilitation, we started off working with patients with chronic knee pain and osteoarthritis. But this is really just the start. Since starting our clinical trials with hospitals, it's opened up an absolute floodgate of new opportunities for us. Because our system is capable of full body tracking, we can look at knee, hip, ankle, shoulder, back, and even spine injuries, and be able to take real-time analysis of what's happening on the patient remotely. We've now been able to start working with total new areas of healthcare, which I don't believe were possible until recently. An example of this is we're working with SGH and patients going with copioid disease. And basically what we're doing is we're doing exercise therapy, but allowing them to give self-reported pain and difficulty scores back to the hospital. And this is something that we've never seen done before. And it gives a lot of insights to the actual hospital about how the patient is coping at home. We've also started working with breast cancer patients because a lot of breast cancer patients get shoulder dysfunction. It actually affects around 90% of them. And by using exercise therapy as part of the rehabilitation progress, we're actually able to improve these women's quality of life and get them returning to normal. So what I see the future is that we're not just limited to one single disease or specific part of healthcare. We see that we're going to be able to integrate across the full spectrum of healthcare and help patients at every point through the value chain. Yeah, that's about it, Helen.
No, but it is very fascinating because it's true that, I mean, if we look at your solution, you may have started with like 2 areas where you wanted to work on, right? But at the same time, now it seems to be exponential actually, where you can actually bring your solution to. And I think this is fantastic because I think a few years ago, it would have never been possible to kind of like extend the reach to all these possibilities with remote monitoring. It was not accepted as it is now, right?
You're exactly right. It just wasn't accepted. And honestly, until 18 months ago, people couldn't even believe this concept that you could put a sensor on somebody and you could be monitoring a stroke patient with carpal tunnel remotely so they don't have to do these trips into the hospital. And I think this is where you're seeing the biggest change, but people quickly realize this can be placed around any patient and even into different scenarios like in-house with a nursing home and senior citizens doing group exercise classes. So really, I see the future is endless for our possibilities. And it's, yeah, just for us, it's really exciting to see how far we can take this in the next few years.
Actually, you bring a good point, because I think that in the end, when I'm looking at this space, I always say to people, it took a pandemic, guys. It took a global virus that hit everyone and everything to have people realize that we have tools around us that were existing, but it really kind of shook the healthcare, industry, and really helped all of you guys, all of us, to have these technology adopted and brought forward, I guess. And so it's super interesting to hear all your perspective. We have a few questions, guys, that I think are very interesting. So let's dive in. So I think that I'll ask it, and maybe one of you could decide on, which one if they want to step in and answer. From anonymous, so I don't have the name. How will the role of pharma change in the world of remote care, where prevention also gains importance, right? And the role of pharma, guys. I'd like to hear your opinion on that. Anyone would like to start?
First, if you like, and the others can. But it's an interesting question because we have a very experienced ex-pharma CEO on our board, and it's really about at what point does pharma want to get involved in direct touch in some circumstances, and how do they want to interact with patients in terms of branding and so on and so forth. But it's very much a case of intervention and prevention before cure, and it really is for pharma to decide if they want to take that role direct to consumer, or if there are other regulations and issues that they have to challenge before they can actually take that approach. We get a lot of interest, and I think there's a lot of interest on their side to figure this out. I certainly think that pharma is making inroads into that environment, and I think we'll see subtle change, and once one breaks, the other will probably quickly follow.
Yeah, probably. Hayley, have you seen in LinkedIn? I don't know if you had a few interactions that you can share. What are your thoughts on this?
No, I think it's a really interesting space, and there's a lot of room to grow. And I agree with Shaun. It's down to the pharma companies to perhaps look to where the innovation can be most spread. I mean, we're seeing things already with drugs and medicines delivered to the door, and all of those changes are very acceptable even in developing countries now. So to then sort of automate that, or have that remotely monitored, and making sure people are understanding what their medications are, how they're taking them, when they need top-ups, when they need progression or regression of certain quantities or doses and things as well. So I mean, there's people working on it, and it's an incredible area that, I'm seeing a lot of innovation in. But I do agree. I think Shaun says, I think we need to partner these amazing innovation companies with the big pharma groups and to expedite this, because it's a real need.
Yeah, certainly. LinkedIn, I don't know if you'd like to opine on this, if you have seen or shared or had a few conversations with pharma on your side.
I see the biggest opportunity is one of the big pharma companies can help spread technologies like ours across the globe and make it accessible to all people. But I see that we can work together, especially like in the areas of remote rehabilitation, where we can see how different conditions can also be connected to pain management as well, and which effective exercise protocols matched with different medicines can create better patient outcomes, and we can actually help our patients through the recovery cycle much faster.
Yeah, you bring a very good point. That would really bring this to the next level, I guess, if you can actually bring all the value chains together, right? It would be fantastic. We have another question. What are the current barriers for remote health, right? More on the tech side, or really policy and regulations? Oh, interesting. Anyone would like to start?
Sure.
Yeah, sure. Go ahead.
Currently, going through the trial, I'm going to say, quantitatively, it's both. No question that it's both. For example, issues on the technology side it's not just about building AI and building out localization and building out accuracy. It's real world challenges such as connectivity. And so what happens if you don't have that connectivity? You can't then train the model and send back an answer. So technology side, we're overcoming that, and it's a really interesting journey. But then we're also faced with things such as ethics committee compliance and meeting the US gold standards for AI, and which really kind of segues into the next question in terms of remote patient monitoring versus patient management. Are you doing an assessment or are you doing a diagnosis? And so, that's the challenges, and that's a massive, gulf to leap in that term. So technology policies, yes, it's both, but there is still a long way for us to go, particularly in terms of making that next leap into a diagnostic capability.
Very good point.
It's such a sorry to lead on from Shaun. It's such a good point, and we can design the most beautiful connected device out there, and it's working beautifully. But I think as technologists, it's the adaptability of that technology. And, for us, our target market tends to be around the 60 years of age up to sort of 90, particularly in the osteoarthritis segment that we're looking after now. And if we can't sort of, design something they're going to be using, as Shaun touched on before, it's again pointless. So even that adaptability, I think that comes into the design aspect is super important. And it's really important to be looking at other industries and what's done well and what's not. And, I think we draw on even the simple engagement of great dashboards and not making them too complex, and looking at the comorbidities that exist in your target segment that perhaps make it difficult for them to read or understand or process, and making sure our designs fit that, so we can obviously have great adaptability, and even getting them around the thought process of using technology, and bridging that gap of, I normally go see my physio, but now you want me to use this app. How do I do that? What's my confidence level? And it was only 3 years ago I sat during my studies at Harvard University, and we were sitting there, and only at that point there were one of our lecturers was actually on the regulation board for looking at the AI regulation for health tech. And so it was really interesting as an innovator. We're still navigating this very early stage aspect of how do we implement AI, what do we do with it, what are the regulations we need to fit in. So there's a lot of challenges that we're all working through as well in that aspect.
That is very true. I mean, I think also, like, if you look at the best example is that a lot of people are using their apps for shopping and stuff like that. But when you're asking them to use it for their own health, now you can potentially bring another completely design that, that needs to be thought through. I mean, it's not just shopping online, isn't it? So
right. Absolutely.
Yeah. Or it needs a lot of work. Lincoln, and would you like to opine on this? What maybe you have seen or experienced?
Hayley touched on all the points about the user adaptability, how to make it easy for the patient to use. But then there was also the question about the regulatory approvals and what are the issues here. This is something that I could spend hours talking about. This is one of the most complex fields to navigate. It's a bit like walking through a minefield. There's no clear path to the market. Like even in a small country like Singapore, every healthcare cluster has a slightly different interpretation of the regulatory procedures for cybersecurity. Now that we see and understand how to walk through this field, and as we look to go into Australia or Indonesia and Malaysia, we see that there's different protocols and different requirements from the government. And so this is something that really stops you moving quickly, but also forces you to become adaptable and learn how to deal with very complex regulatory requirements that really makes it difficult just to really to put a sensor on somebody and help them access healthcare remotely. But this is one of the challenges I think we have to face, and we just have to find a way to navigate through this field.
Thank you so much. We have a question in the chat section, and I think it's unfortunately going to be our last question, but I think we all have an opinion on this. So let's dive into that question. As it's Smart RX who's asking, the big four, tech companies from the US have not been very successful when it comes to healthcare. So, and I think that's true. And we hear that all the time. Why and how do you think startup can do better, right? And I'm sure as a startup founder and CEO, you guys are challenged with that every day. You see these big guys doing a lot of things, and here you are trying to navigate your way. Do you have an opinion on that? What you would like to express and say, how do you view this as well?
Yeah, are you guys happy if I take this one for the lead? Over to you in a moment. I think the biggest thing we're experiencing, and if we look at the big four and the ability of more nimble, fresh people coming into the innovation space is, are they connecting to patients in a way that they're then designing into their technology that's going to get the results they're after? I don't believe so. That's quite bold in saying that, but I think looking at and speaking to many surgeons on this, one of the big four offers an Apple Watch to generate more compliance post-operative for post-operative care. So we're seeing things out in the market, particularly different segments here in Australia, where the mum who's been given this Apple Watch to go and do all her amazing recovery on is, the surgeon can see it tracking at about 10,000 steps a day. And so that, something's going wrong there. So they're actually passing that watch off to their son as a gift because they're not seeing the value. And so it comes back to the decisions of why would you do that? What's of value to the patient? Maybe the engagement point and those discussions and that connections to the patients and the surgeons go amiss. And I think that's what smaller companies and companies like all of us here today do really, really well. And that's what I would say is a big game changer.
Yeah, very good point. Shaun, I don't know, or Lincoln, would you like to add something to this?
Let me put this in perspective. It's very simple. In the developing countries, this is the only device, if you can see the phone, this is the only device they actually carry on a continuous basis. Number one, the number of Apple Watches and Fitbits, etc., in somewhere like Indonesia and Vietnam, you put those percentage points, you could count on one hand. The phone is the only thing that they have in large quantities, and the localization of that capability is also very important. There's a lot of local factors, not just things like BMI measurements, etc., but also doing certain things, or in terms of making sure you don't upset certain segments of the population into how you interact with male or female. These types of things were found to also come into the characteristics of why we think that localization is a big key for why the big four have not worked successfully outside of the US.
Yeah, very good. And Lincoln, what about you? Do you have something you'd like to share on this?
Truth is why the big four companies have not been successful with this. Until recently, the market wasn't ready for remote rehabilitation, digital healthcare. It's actually taken this massive push and drive from this pandemic to open up the floodgates for this. I think you'll see soon that there will be a higher acceptance of digital health, and you'll probably see more success from these big companies. But one of the reasons that small companies like us can be very successful is that we work very closely with the hospitals. You know, we can make specific treatment and plans for rehabilitation based around clinical needs of specific hospitals. And I think for us being so small and fighting against these giants in the market, it's the only way. We have to really get the support of our hospitals at a local level. And then we have to be able to copy this into the other markets to grow and be able to somehow fight with these giants.
Yeah, that's it, guys. I think that all these three answers are summing it up very, very well. It's sure you might not have all the means, the bank account and all the team of these big four, but at the same time, you guys are on the market working closely with each and every one of these big guys, the important actors, the hospital, the health professional, but as well as the patient. And I think that, you know, people tend to underestimate how sometimes being very niche, lean and quick can actually help accelerate a lot of the things that big fours cannot do at this moment, the big tech, I should say. Listen, maybe a quick other question, because I think that I will need to wrap up, but this, I'm just trying to, there's a few questions that appeared in the chat, guys. So this is what, I'm just trying to see which one we can answer very quick. Mm-hmm. Maybe this one. So will remote healthcare finally enable value-based care? Interesting question. And what are your thoughts on this? That's probably something you're aiming at, right?
Definitely. I mean, from our perspective, value-based care where you don't have the infrastructure costs and you can deliver it at the edge for a fraction of that cost, you know, it should be passed on to the end user, be it through the private health, through insurers, etc. You know, the digitalization of that customer experience allows you to service them at the edge. Obviously, will incur low infrastructure costs. Therefore, that cost savings should be passed on.
Yeah, very, very good point. Anyone would like to add anything on this?
Yeah, look, I think that's where we need to be, value-based care. It seems to be a sensible way to all work together. We look at 70% of the world's population cannot afford healthcare, so something needs to change. So I think if we're working with health providers to access those rebates and bundling systems makes great sense. And that's something we're certainly gearing to do from the get-go to make sure we are supporting that model, which I believe is the future that just needs to translate more generally across the globe.
Yeah, very good point. I'm sure, LinkedIn, you'd certainly agree to all of this, right?
Yes, I totally agree with all this. But I think with this technology now, value-based care is going to come very quickly. We see now that the insurance agencies are highly engaged with us, and we see that this is something that they're looking for. How can they keep an eye on what's happening to their patients, to their customers when they're going through surgery? And this will drive them to bring in value-based care. Like, we will only pay for this surgery based on their outcome. And so it will make hospitals have to work towards actually helping the patient with their best interest in mind, as opposed to looking for monetary gain from simply performing the operations.
Yeah, very good point. Listen, guys, that's all the time we have. I'm sorry for the participants who are sending questions and we can't, cover them all, but nevertheless, thank you so much. I'm sure that everyone, if we had a real event physically, everyone would applaud very, very loudly. It was super great, very generous of you. Great insight. Thank you so much, guys. And if anyone wants to reach you, you guys have shared all of your data, contact details right in the chat. So thank you so much again.
Wonderful. Thank you for having us, and thanks for everyone's time.
Thank you, guys.